So this week, in preparation for our next project that's due, I really want to spend a lot of time going over all of the different mesh tools working with polymodeling. Before we go there, though, I want to talk a little bit about, because we've already experimented with polygon modeling in this first week, I want to talk about another way to model in Maya, which is modeling NURBS. And NURBS are based off of curves, whereas polygons are based off of straight lines. So even if I have something like a polysphere, this sphere is actually not a true sphere. It's made up of individual facets here, individual straight lines to give, and when you have enough detail, enough subdivisions, it gives the illusion of being spherical, when in reality it's still made up of a number of straight lines. And we can really see this if we bring down the number of subdivisions, that this sphere is really made up of flat faces. This is different from a NURBS surface, which is made up of NURBS patches formed from curves. So if I create this NURBS sphere, we can see that it is based off of curved geometry. And so I would recommend using NURBS to then convert those NURBS to a polygonal model. And the reason you want to do that is because you can't 3D print from a NURBS surface. And also NURBS take longer to compute their shape and everything else, whether you're rendering it. I don't think that they export as a model into Unity, because they don't have fixed points. There's like extra math that goes into generating a curve, an object that's derivative of curves rather than objects that are derivative of straight lines. But there's a lot that you can do with curves, and you can then go ahead and convert those curves and convert those curved surfaces into polygons after you're done modeling. And so if you have an object that is made up of rounder kind of forms, then this might be a way that you can do some of the modeling more easily than to try to model something from straight lines. Let me go ahead and give you an overview of curves and curved surfaces. What we have we have a number here of NURBS primitives. So just like we had poly primitives that we were working with, we also have NURB primitives. So this is a NURB cylinder. And what it is it's a circular curve, and that has been it's basically made up of two curves, and then all NURB surfaces are actually based off of rectangular patches, which then follow the curves. Okay, so these patches are kind of infinitely flexible, like an infinitely flexible rubber that can make any kind of form, but they're all these kind of square patches. And if I go here to my Make NURB Cylinder node, I can start and end what's called the sweep, and this will really give you an idea of how this shape is generated. I have here, and it's a little bit of a brighter, a more bold kind of line, that this is actually where the object starts and ends. This is where the curve begins and ends as it sweeps around. And so what I can do is I can kind of start, and I can decide where this curve starts and ends, or where this sweep of this NURB patch starts and ends here. I can, say what is the radius of this, what's the height ratio, how many what are called spans or sections makes up this patch. And so if I right click, I actually have a number of different components than when I'm working with poly modeling. I still have object mode, which I'm in now, but I also have control vertex. And what this is, and you can actually see it if I go to hull, that the hull is the form that is generating the geometry of this curve. And so the hull is made up of control vertex points here. And this is how we can kind of manipulate the way that this, oh, I'm sorry, I have snap to grid on, the way that this surface is formed, the way that this curve, the shape of this curve and the way that it's formed is all manipulated with these control vertex points. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go and delete this NURB cylinder. And you see here in our outliner we have a different icon for a NURB surface than we do if we are modeling with polygons. Go ahead and delete this. And so we can, make forms based off of these kind of primitive NURBS primitives, but we also, what's really kind of special about working with curves and working with NURBS is to create your own curved forms and then generate surfaces from them. So there's a couple different ways that we can create curves. There's a number of them here in the toolbar, but we also can go ahead and go to create. The shelf here contains a number of them. But if we go up to create and then we have curve tools here, we have some that don't appear on the shelf. And one of them is the CV curve tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click the CV curve tool. And also, when I am drawing a curve, I'm actually drawing it, I'm going to be drawing it in one of the orthographic modes. So I'm drawing it flat. Curves have two axes, a U and a V axis, as opposed to a three-dimensional X, Y, and Z axes. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle into my top view here, just so I can really see what shape I'm drawing. And with the CV curve tool, I have to drop down 4 points, 4 control, CV means control vertex points, to then generate the shape of my curve. And so curves have a direction, and we know what the direction is when we look at our control vertex because we have this little square here, and then we have a U, and this shows us the direction of our curve. Okay, I can keep dropping points in here, and I can drag and drop as many as I need to. And then when I'm done, I can hit enter, and now I have generated my curve. Let me go back to my perspective view. So you can see what this curve looks like. It's flat on the grid here. And so I am able to, just like a poly object, I'm able to manipulate this using my transform tools. And so I would do this. I can obviously move, and I can move it in the Y direction also. That's fine, but it's just I would be drawing it in a kind of 2D mode. So I can, move the whole object, or I can right-click, and just like with poly modeling, we had object, edge, face, or objects, faces, edges, and vertices. Here we have points. We have curve points, edit points, and control vertex points. So if I go to my control vertex points, I can see those points that I dropped in to generate this curve, and I can also go ahead and manipulate my curve using these control vertex points. One thing that I just did, which is a handy kind of little trick, is I pressed the minus key on my keyboard. I'm using a Mac. And so this actually makes the pivot smaller, or if I press the plus sign, it makes it larger. So this is kind of useful because if I zoom in, it maintains its size. So I can, depending on, what kind of works for me, make this pivot larger or smaller. Okay, so just so you know, as an aside, that's what I just did. I just kind of shrunk it down a little bit. So I can move these control vertex points around in order to manipulate the shape of my curve. And even though I initially drew this in 2D, I am able to manipulate the curve in 3D if I need to, okay? But for what I'm going to be doing, how I'm going to be generating surfaces with this, I'm going to just keep it right now in this kind of 2D mode. as a flat curve on the surface of the grid. So how do I make a form from this? There's a number of different ways that I can add a surface to this curve. And one of them is called a loft. And let me go ahead, that's the first way I want to create a surface here is by using the loft function. I need two curves in order to do it. So what I'm going to do really simply is I'm going to go to my object mode here. I'm going to hit Command D and duplicate this curve. I'm going to extend it up a little bit. I'm going to select both curves here, and I'm going to go to surfaces and say loft. And now what I've done is I've created a surface between those two curves. And the great thing about working with curves is curved surfaces is that I'm able to, by manipulating these curves, they're tied to this to the surface. And so I can go in and like right click on here and go to Control Vertex, and I can go ahead and manipulate the shape of my surface by manipulating the vertex points of my curve. So modeling something like this with straight lines would be quite a bit more complicated. And so working with curves and working with curved surfaces is a really nice way to create some very complex kind of forms. Let me go ahead and I can, and I can work in the same, with all of the same tools that I would use if I was working in polygon mode. So as far as, using obviously these transform tools, but these tool settings here, I have soft selection, I have the ability to change the axis orientation and things like that. So just kind of keep that in mind. And so this is one way that we can create a surface from a curve. In the next video, I think I'll stop this one here, and I'll show you a couple other curve tools or surface tools by using curves.